Welcome back to Face the Nation. We go now to Louisiana Congresswoman-elect Dr. Julia Letlow. Welcome to Face the Nation.
Thank you so much for having me, Margaret.
Doctor, you are the first Republican Congresswoman in Louisiana's history, and you won your seat in a special election that was held after your husband, Luke Letlow, recently passed away from COVID in December. And I'm wondering how that experience firsthand with COVID is going to inform your work here in Washington.
Well, it's definitely going to inform my work. I just want to take a second to acknowledge all of the Americans out there who have lost loved ones to COVID. I want to say that I see you, I hear you, I most importantly pray with you. I'm a huge proponent of the vaccine. It has life-saving capabilities. And I want to encourage anybody out there who's eligible to go ahead and get that vaccine. It's so important.
And that's a resident message coming from you, not just because of your personal experience, but also, I mean, frankly, looking at your district. Louisiana is going to open up eligibility on Monday, right, for everyone 16 and up. One group, though,
That's right.
what we're seeing in our own polling, though, is a new level of hesitation among self-identified Republicans 65 and younger. So when you are speaking to voters, what is your message to them about why they should trust this vaccine?
That's right. That's why I want to be an advocate and a voice for everyone. You look at my family, use my story. I experienced a tragedy in my immediate family, and COVID can touch every family out there. And so, if there is a vaccine that has life-saving capabilities, I want to encourage everyone to trust it and get the vaccine.
I know you spoke with former President Trump. You also received a phone call from President Biden, who talked to you about your loss. Can you share with us anything about that phone call?
Sure. They were both so gracious and expressed their condolences. And President Biden, who is no stranger to loss as well, shared with me that he understood the pain that I was walking through and that it will get better. And I know it will.
Well, I know we all hope it certainly does for you. And you have a lot of business to carry on behalf of your constituents when you get here. I mean, looking at your district, you have one of the highest poverty rates in the country, got about 25%. You've said for you a priority is expanding broadband access infrastructure. That's high on President Biden's list. Does that mean as a Republican in the House, you are going to get on board with his proposals?
Well, I'm definitely going to get on board with any proposal that is going to provide rural broadband to my district. Just like you said, we have some of the highest poverty rates in the nation right here. My background is in higher education. I believe if you can educate a child, you give them a future. And so I want to champion education all the way from early childhood, K through 12, our underutilized trade schools and community colleges, to our four-year institutions. And there's nothing like a pandemic, Margaret, to bring to light how vital rural broadband is in educating our children, but also providing health care to the constituents in my district.
So there has already been apprehension. The bill hasn't even been proposed yet. It's just being talked about. But the price tag on it, another $2 trillion or more. Does this mean, as a Republican, you would vote for anything that would expand broadband access?
Well, I would definitely have to take a close look at the bill. I'm not up there yet, so I would definitely have to analyze it. But I'm going to be looking for avenues to find a way to expand rural broadband in my district. So I'll look at everything that's on the table.
You are joining a record-breaking number of women in the House of Representatives. When we looked at Louisiana, it's at around the bottom of the country when it comes to equal pay for women, particularly Black women. It's about 47 cents on the dollar. Latina women, about 52 cents. Women writ large, about 74 cents. Is addressing pay equity a priority for you?
It's definitely something that I will look into. I believe women should be paid equitably. But I am so proud to be the first Republican woman elected to represent the state of Louisiana. When you look at the population, the makeup of Louisiana, roughly 52% is female. Every issue is a woman's issue, and so it's a wonderful opportunity for Louisiana to have a woman to have a seat at the table.
And we will be watching what you do with that. I want to ask you to share some of your personal experience. You talked about your personal loss here, and I know when we looked at your background, you've experienced quite a lot of grief in your life. You also lost your 17-year-old brother in a car accident when he was in college. You wrote a thesis and a dissertation on grief itself. What is your lesson, as you said, for those who have lost during this pandemic? How do you continue moving forward as you did with, bringing your children here to Washington, continuing to push forward with a career in the mass of such a loss?
That's right. Well, I happen to be a woman of faith. I believe that the Lord doesn't waste an experience, good or bad. And so all of those experiences that I've had prior, even writing a dissertation, just like you said, on finding meaning after the loss of a family member, is helping guide me through. One of the findings of my dissertation was that when a person can get outside of themselves during the grieving process and find ways to serve others, that can actually be cathartic and helping guide them through the grieving process. So I just see everything in my life and in my marriage has led me to this one moment in time. I'm so honored and excited to serve the people of the 5th District.
Congresswoman-elect, we will be watching. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be right back. Most regions of the world are seeing an increase in COVID infections as highly contagious variants continue to spread. The World Health Organization called it a worrying sign. Senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer reports from Tel Aviv.
Good morning. Israel, where I am, has now vaccinated almost 3/4 of adults over 16 years old, and the effect has been dramatic. The number of people who died on average every day last week was down to 12. By contrast, Europe is in big trouble. Czechs stopped for a minute of silence on Monday, a year after the first COVID patient died there. In the old town square, white crosses marked the lives lost so far, and now deaths are climbing again. Most European countries are either heading for or are in a third wave of infection that German health authorities warn could be the worst yet. Europe's vaccine rollout has been crippled by politics and supply problems. But it is at last accelerating, with temporary centers springing up everywhere, including this French velodrome. And 3 new vaccine manufacturing sites have just been approved, which will also help. Then there's Brazil, now responsible for 1/4 of COVID deaths worldwide every day. Regional governments have closed beaches, restricted traffic, and told people to stay home. Medical teams are doing their best, but poverty, disinformation, and a more contagious variant means 80,000 new cases every day, and a warning that Brazil may end up with more coronavirus deaths overall, even than the United States. As for the World Health Organization report by the team that had traveled to China to look for the origins of the virus, it's been much delayed. Once again, it was due out on Friday. So far, no sign of it. Margaret?
Liz, thank you. We go now to former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He sits on the board of Pfizer as well as Illumina, and he joins us from Westport, Connecticut. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Do you agree with Dr. Fauci in terms of his projections on where we are headed with this sort of stuck at about 60,000 infections a day level?
Yeah, well, we've now vaccinated 92 million Americans. It's about 28% of the public. About 50 million have been fully vaccinated. That's 15%. Israel started to see the big declines in cases when they hit about 25% of their population vaccinated. So I think that's a pretty big backstop against a true fourth surge. What we're seeing around the nation right now, which is worrisome, are outbreaks in certain states. Michigan, the Metro Detroit area, Boston, around Massachusetts, the tri-state region, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, are experiencing an upsurge of infection. And I think what we need to do is try to continue to vaccinate, surge vaccine into those parts of the country. So the incremental vaccine that's coming onto the market, I think the Biden administration can allocate it to parts of the country that look hot right now. But if we could just get 2 or 3 more weeks of around 3 million vaccines a day, that's going to be a pretty big backstop against a true fourth surge.
Well, 3 million a day or so. The president's benchmark was 200 million by the end of April. We're already at 140. So that is, it sounds like you're saying, a very hittable target. But how do you overcome that sort of last hurdle of skepticism, particularly among Republicans? I mean, is the government going to be the best messenger in this case?
They won't be, and you need to get the vaccine into community sites that have relationships with patients and get it into more doctors' offices, get it into pharmacies. You know, the administration is starting to push a lot of vaccine out through different channels. They've given the pharmacies a big role. They'll be marketing the vaccine very aggressively. They're going to community sites, community health centers. So that's what we should be doing. They're going to start vaccinating patients who present to dialysis centers. We should be vaccinating patients on discharge from the hospital, patients who go into infusion sites. So we should be looking at every single interaction that patients have with the medical system and trying to offer a vaccination at those points of care through a provider that patients know. That's ultimately how we're going to get some people who are more hesitant about being vaccinated to take up the vaccine.
People you trust, not necessarily people you celebrities.
Exactly.
On the World Health Organization, I want to add nothing against celebrity endorsements of vaccines. On the World Health Organization and what Dr. Fauci was saying, I know you must be looking at this. He said, yes, the White House is talking about it, but he has no indication of what policies there might be regarding patent protections of pharmaceutical companies who make COVID vaccines. The World Health Organization chief has endorsed this idea of lifting it in order to help some developing countries get access. What is the implication if that happens?
Well, look, I think the implication is you're going to provide disincentives for the future, but the reality is, just looking at the practicality of it, the rate-limiting step here is not the intellectual property around these vaccines. These companies are producing, including Pfizer, the company I'm on the board of, as much as they can. The rate-limiting factor here are the raw ingredients, the inputs to making those vaccines. There's just a limited global supply of those highly specialized inputs. If you appropriate the intellectual property and give it to a bunch of other companies to try to make these vaccines, they're not going to be able to make them efficiently, and they're not going to be able to stand up the supply because they don't have the supply chain either. If they manage to secure it, it's just going to come at the expense of companies like Pfizer and Moderna that are making these vaccines far more efficiently. I think what we have to be doing is trying to get more resources into expanding that manufacturing capacity. This really is an opportunity for President Biden to do what President Bush did around the PEPFAR program and create a global campaign to try to supply vaccine around the world using the U.S. intellectual property. These companies have already donated vaccine. They'd be willing to provide more to low and middle income countries if the U.S. government would backstop some of the legal protections around doing that. So there are opportunities here to dramatically expand global supply. Unfortunately, I think just giving away our intellectual property is going to be an empty promise. It's not going to result in more vaccine in these countries.
So when someone looks at what Liz Palmer was just describing happen in Brazil with this surge where it seems almost uncontrolled within their borders, this is not something you would point to as a solution to surge vaccine into a problem country?
It would be a solution. Right now, we don't have the supply to do that. I think we can get the supply, but not in time probably for Brazil. And Brazil's been reluctant to take up the vaccine. That's part of the problem, too, is policy failure down there.
When it comes to the World Health Organization report on the origins of this, you and I have spoken about this in the past. We've had Matt Pottinger, the former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, on. I know Dr. Redfield has spoken to CNN, the former CDC director, about his theories on the origin of COVID. To be clear here, when it comes to this report, you've said you believe the most likely scenario on the origins of COVID is that it was just bouncing back and forth between people and animals for a period of time and finally broke out. But you said the lab theory is never going to be fully dispelled, and the World Health Organization shouldn't walk away from that so easily. Do you expect them to walk away from that when this report comes out?
It looks like the WHO report was an attempt to try to support the Chinese narrative around this origin of the vaccine. You know, the lab leak theory doesn't seem like a plausible theory unless you aggregate the biggest collection of coronaviruses and put them in a lab, a minimum security lab in the middle of a densely populated center and experiment on animals, which is exactly what the Wuhan Institute of Virology did. They were using these viruses in a BSL-2 lab, and we now know infecting animals. So that creates the opportunity for a lab leak. It might not be the most likely scenario in how this virus got out, but it has to remain a scenario. And I think at the end of the day, we're never going to fully discharge that possibility. What we're going to have here is a battle of competing narratives.
Mm-hmm. And we will continue to cover it. Thank you very much, Dr. Gottlieb, for your analysis. We'll be back in a moment. We go now to Tony Capuano, CEO of the world's largest hotel company, Marriott International. He joins us from Bethesda, Maryland. Good morning.
Good morning.
We just heard Dr. Fauci say that travel remains high risk, and yet we see numbers from TSA reporting people are getting on planes in record numbers in terms of the pandemic. Are you seeing a similar surge in spring bookings?
We are seeing pretty significant acceleration of demand. The reality is people are traveling, which is why we can't let our guard down. We've got to continue to adhere to the CDC protocols and keep our cleaning and operating protocols in place.
So vaccination, you have said, is going to be key to business, to the economy, reopening it. You have actually opened a program to try to incentivize your employees to take that vaccine by offering them, 4 hours of pay. Why did you need to give that incentive, and is it working?
We didn't need to, we chose to. Our culture is very much an employee-first culture, and we wanted to make sure they had access to education about the vaccinations and the flexibility to take time off work if they chose to get vaccinated.
So that 4 hours of pay is to allow them to take the time off work to get the shot in the arm?
That's correct.
So last March, your predecessor said the financial impact of the pandemic was on par with 9/11, the Great Recession and the financial crisis around that time. Marriott cut thousands of jobs. You lost about $276 million. When do you expect to get back to that pre-pandemic level of both jobs and business?
It really depends on demand recovery, and demand recovery will be driven by consumer confidence. The good news is we have such great visibility into real-time data. In certain markets where the virus containment seems to be proceeding well and where you're seeing broad distribution of vaccine, we are seeing demand recover, and that's allowing us to bring many of our employees back.
So demand is up. Arizona, Texas, and Florida, I see, but it's still low in some of the big cities. Is that a trend you think is going to stay with us for some time?
We'll continue to see growth in demand in drive-to destinations, and I think leisure destinations. One of the really interesting phenomenon we've seen over the last year is a blending of trip purposes. People have learned that they can, in fact, work from almost anywhere. And as a result, we're seeing our guests combine business travel with leisure travel.
Gas prices aren't going to impact those drive-to destination bookings?
Certainly, they'll have some measure of impact, but we've really not seen it yet. There is enormous pent-up demand. And because of concerns about safety, we continue to see lots of appeal of drive-to destinations.
You know, when we look at the jobless rate in the country, your industry is so frequently pointed to as one of the biggest places of losses, particularly for women. I'm wondering, of all the adaptations that you have had to make in your hotels for safety reasons and protocols, with not checking in person, but doing it on your phone or doing it, digitally, haven't you managed your way towards just needing to employ fewer people? I mean, are these jobs actually coming back?
In markets where demand is recovering, we're absolutely seeing those jobs come back. And in many of the markets you described, we're actively hiring. I think what those technological advances allow us to do is really engage our employees more in interacting with the guests and meeting their needs.
So desk clerk is not a job that's going to disappear?
Absolutely not.
In New York State, they're kind of experimenting with something I'm interested in getting your view on, which is this idea of having some kind of vaccine passport, so to speak, some kind of digital stamp to show that you have been vaccinated. Is this something that you think, business-wise, you would encourage other states to adopt? I mean, would it help give you some reassurance?
Time will tell what the right platform is. What we know with certainty, however, is a global, coordinated, reliable health credentials system will be key to giving folks comfort about traveling and to giving jurisdictions comfort in opening their borders.
But who is going to run that? Since the states are administering these vaccine programs, you know, the particulars of how you actually get this up and running are kind of a big stumbling point.
It's the right question to ask. I worry a bit that the approach to date is a bit fragmented. And again, we need a comprehensive and global solution for it to be effective.
Have you talked to the White House about that?
We're in active discussions with the administration, with our industry colleagues to try and identify opportunities to inform borders as they consider opening.
You know, 24 or so industry groups wrote a letter to the White House pushing for international travel to be reopened by this summer, saying that's a really key time frame for them. Do you have any indication that any of the travel restrictions will be lifted, that international travel will return?
It really varies by jurisdiction. We know there's enormous pent-up demand for international travel. And we know those destinations, like many European cities, are struggling mightily because they rely so heavily on inbound international travel. The markets that have recovered most quickly are those that have depths of demand domestically. So we've seen that in drive-to destinations in the US, and we've seen it across China.
But no promise from the White House, we're lifting the travel restrictions on countries by the summer?
Not yet.
All right. Thank you very much, Tony Capuano, for your time and your perspective. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. And before we go, we did want to extend a thank you to broadcast producer Jillian Hughes, who is leaving our program and our network. She will be missed. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.